Content warning. Discussion of suicide, filicide, murder, euthanasia, and abuse. Here's a playlist of cute animals to watch instead. Welcome back to Part 2. If you haven't seen Part 1 about selective abortion, here it is. You don't really need to watch it to understand this one, but it helps. Now we're riding this non-stop fun train to our next destination, euthanasia.
Of course I support euthanasia and abortion. Bodily autonomy, same idea. You do what you want with your body.
Okay, yeah. As long as someone fully consents, then sure, it's their choice, right? Maybe there's some complicating factors, but okay. In a perfect society, at what point of pain or dysfunction would you want to be euthanized?
Well, I could maybe go on living with your disabilities. But if I, had to have help going to the bathroom or something, I'd probably kill myself.
I don't feel like you're learning anything from these talks. Neoliberal eugenics. Euthanasia. Really? You would end your entire life over not being able to wipe your own ass. And you wonder why I made a whole YouTube channel about disability. Honestly.
What? I wouldn't be able to tolerate the loss of dignity.
What's so dignified about wiping your own ass? No, let's not. I'm not engaging with that. People are always overestimating how much something like that would really impact their happiness. This tendency is fittingly called impact bias, and applies both to bad and good things. Psychologist Dan Gilbert found that 1 year after winning the lottery, a person will be just as happy as they were before, which is as happy as the average person. And 1 year after becoming paraplegic, a person will be just as happy as they were before. So 1 year later, a person who loses their legs and a person who wins the lottery will be equally as happy as one another.
How can you even study that? Does he just ask them, hey, how are you? Of course you're going to say, I'm fine. Maybe these people just default to answering boring questions the same way. How do you trust what people say? There's no way those paraplegics were really just as happy as they were before. They're just saying that so no one feels sorry for them.
Okay, if you don't trust words, I'll tell you about some actions. In one study, the experimental groups were told they were part of a new program that's trying to make sure participants leave psychology studies in the same mood they arrived in. In order to achieve this, they were offered a herbal drug said to improve moods. In one group, participants were told to select their dose before potentially being rejected for a date. They said they'd need 1.29 milligrams on average to get back to the mood they were in when they arrived. Another group selected their dosage only after actually not being selected for the date. This group selected 0.64 milligrams of the drug, an amount which the study assures me is significantly lower.
That's just for one little thing. Losing your legs changes your whole life. I still think the paraplegics weren't being totally honest. There's no way they could be just as happy as they were when they had legs.
I presume those people who lost function in their legs probably wanted to keep using them, yeah, but they adapted. Just like we assume Pete Best wanted to continue being the drummer in the Beatles because, of course, he wanted to be in the Beatles. But Pete Best has been quoted as saying, "I'm happier than I would have been with the Beatles."
Yeah, right.
That is you judging their happiness to be of a lesser quality because they didn't get what they wanted. Natural happiness is the term for what happens when you get what you want. And the happiness we create when we don't get what we want, the happiness you just sneered at, is termed synthetic happiness, which sounds kind of kinky, like a new line of techno-dystopian sex dolls. But this is where happiness researchers' imperialist bias starts showing, because there's really nothing more natural about one form of happiness over the other. It's a misnomer. They're functionally the same. It's our society which makes the distinction. Yes, here we are debunking another naturalistic fallacy, just like in the first video with the bonobos and the baboons. There's going to be a lot of these. Capitalists love a good naturalistic fallacy. Dan Gilbert himself contextualizes his research on happiness well.
What kind of economic engine would keep churning if we believed that not getting what we want could make us just as happy as getting it? With all apologies to my friend Mathieu Ricard, a shopping mall full of Zen monks is not going to be particularly profitable because they don't want stuff enough.
Fine, so okay, I'll be just as happy without legs. Sure. But at what point should I kill myself?
At no point. Oh my god, are you okay?
No. I mean, okay. When do you think life isn't worth living?
I'm not sure I can say. I think when having this conversation, we have to properly contextualize the discussion within an ableist society with a capitalist relationship to the means of production. We have to talk about how our society manufactures consent, not only overtly through policies, but covertly through media and our relationship to the means of production. For a good general overview of manufactured consent, watch this video by Halim Al-Ra. When people can't afford end-of-life or continuous life care, then our society sees them as burdens and incentivizes suicide. This is done through insufficient or non-existent medical care, isolation, and manufacturing shame. It's a common trope to threaten elderly family members with nursing homes. It's almost cliché to hear elderly people in TV and movies say some variation of, "I'd rather die than be put in a home." Unfortunately, this isn't just a trope. This is reality. Over half of people over the age of 50 who were surveyed in 2019 would really actually rather die than have to live in an assisted living facility. There are strong movements in disability communities to change our current care model to exclusively utilize in-home care and abolish these facilities. The reasons for an in-home model should be pretty obvious if you just, think about it for 1 second. People want to stay in their homes where they're already comfortable. To expand on this notion of comfort, let's go over why 50% of people over the age of 50 would rather die than go into an assisted living facility. So what were the main reasons cited in this study? Loneliness, loss of independence, and being without family. There's nothing inherently isolating about needing care. Care positions are miserably underpaid and understaffed with high rates of worker turnover. Think of this from a profit-making perspective. If you were running a business where the customers had little to no bargaining rights and no choice but to be there, wouldn't you feel free to hire as few people as possible and pay them as little as possible in order to maximize profits? This loneliness is the natural result of not having consistent caregivers to form relationships with, and not having enough caregivers to take clients to community events or help them use technology to stay in touch with friends and family. The loss of independence obviously also ties into the lack of caregivers. However, it's important to note the cultural biases we have about accepting help. Accepting care or help, particularly in the form of government assistance, is treated as a weakness or loss of independence, rather than something which enables independence and builds strength. And we know how much our culture fetishizes a very specific brand of independence and strength. How often do you see movies, TV shows, and news articles in which a person kills themselves for the greater good? How often are their actions depicted as ableist, ignorant, irrational, or the result of depression? No? What about as bravery or the ultimate sacrifice? The decision to die for everyone to have more resources rather than live and use up limited resources is, in reality, not a choice anyone has to make right now. Our medical and caregiving resources are really not so limited as austerity measures and hyperinflation lead us to believe. The decision to die so others may have more resources is made to seem controversial yet brave. And by making it seem so, the media has tricked us all into thinking it must be right. Would you rather bankrupt your family and be viewed as a drain on society's resources, or become an hero? For those who haven't been on the internet in 10 years, good for you. On 4chan, land of the edgelords, if you kill yourself, particularly for a seemingly minor reason, you become an hero. I know that it's meant, ironically, but still funny that they latched onto such language. Family members and friends are led to believe that all of a chronically ill or terminally ill person's needs must be handled with specialized care for which they would need training. Caitlin Doughty has dedicated herself to dispelling myths about death and explaining how the funeral industry has convinced people that it's unsafe to handle bodies, when it really isn't. This is similar to the misconceptions we have about chronic health needs and end-of-life care. You don't need special training to touch a corpse, and you don't need special training to interact with a disabled person. You don't need to put yourself in the helper role at all. Do you only ever hang out with people who are helping you or caring for you? Probably not. Why would it be different for a disabled person? Don't you think we also want friends to just hang out and play video games with? This feeling of powerlessness, unfamiliarity, and discomfort tends to keep friends and family members away. Not to mention the cost of housing someone in a care facility often requires family members to work far more hours to compensate, leaving them with even less time to make visits. How would the average person even learn how to interact with people who are dying or who have significant disabilities? Through the media? Again, like corpses, terminally ill or disabled people are tucked away in little boxes, one next to the other, conveniently compartmentalized and filed away so you can visit, but you don't have to, out of sight, out of mind. Putting a straw in someone's mouth is not specialized care. Helping someone sit up is not specialized care. Watching TV with them, talking to them, taking them shopping, making them dinner, none of these are specialized skills in any way. This is my dad's actual job. He's paid to do these things. His official title is a companion. He's not medically trained at all, and he makes a few cents more than minimum wage working for very wealthy clients in care facilities, which cost them anywhere from $3,000 a month to $10,000 a month. His job is sort of an add-on that community members can optionally get. Think of the message this sends. Companionship is a luxury good. Isolation is standard and sufficient. If we look at the average pay of caregivers in these facilities, we can see that society outright tells us all that providing care for people in these facilities is not really important, essential, or worth anyone's time or money. I could make a whole other video specifically about the problems with care facilities. Suffice to say here that they're eerily similar to issues found within prisons, another for-profit establishment where people don't really have any choice but to be there. My point here is, basically, when people would rather die than be taken care of by our current system of healthcare, then that's obviously a huge fucking problem when discussing consent. When we discuss active euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide, we're not asking, would you, a fully independent thinking individual, rather avoid the physical suffering which is directly attributable to your health condition, or die in pain but taken care of comfortably in your own home? No. We're asking, would you rather experience the emotional pain of being ostracized by society, the guilt of forcing your family to go into debt, the shame you've internalized from an ableist society about asking for help, and the physical pain of your health condition, or would you rather die?
Okay, we've contextualized it. Whatever. You really didn't answer my question at all. What if you developed some horrible, painful sort of cancer or disease from which you will certainly die within 6 months, even with treatment?
That's how the Death with Dignity Act in Oregon works. Limiting the act of active euthanasia only to those with terminal conditions removes a lot of fears that the disability community has about its use for people with chronic, but not fatal health conditions. But this concept of dignity still comes with an ableist miasma. I don't see why I'd necessarily need to be put down via physician-assisted suicide. I'd simply request to end life-saving treatment if I wanted death expedited. I could still take painkillers. Spending the last 6 months of my life on morphine, hanging out with my friends and family, and doing whatever I want really doesn't sound all that terrible. I've never been in that situation before, though, so I guess I can't say for sure. What I can say for sure is that no one really knows how big of a role physical pain plays in requests for euthanasia versus material conditions, since it's sort of a requirement to claim pain as a reason. If you walk into a doctor's office and say, "Hey doc, my material conditions are terrible. I can't afford better pain meds or caregivers. I don't want my family to go bankrupt. I'm embarrassed that I can't provide for them anymore. Oh, and I have cancer and that hurts too." You're not getting a lethal injection. You're maybe getting paperwork and applications for programs that might get you slightly less expensive care. And anyone applying for assisted suicide knows this. I found several studies analyzing people's given reasons for euthanasia, but I hesitate to take them as fact. All the studies I've read thus far have noted in only 1 or 2 dismissive sentences that demographic and care factors have been reported to influence requesting and receiving physician-assisted suicide. Obviously, if a person wants to die, then they'll say whatever won't disqualify them. However, contrary to what may be expected, it seems euthanasia is most popular among people in higher socioeconomic classes with more education rather than lower with less. This may be due to less religiosity, more weight placed upon preserving large financial inheritances, more strict or limiting conceptions of dignity, or any number of other factors. And if the pain was absolutely unbearable, even with painkillers and appropriate care and support, then suicide is still an option. I wouldn't need to ask a doctor to kill me.
But why remove treatment rather than actively euthanize you? You're gonna die anyway. What's the difference?
If I have people caring for me, and I have pain relief, and I still get to experience life, then I don't really see why I would want to be euthanized. Like I said, if I change my mind, suicide is not off the table. The problem is, suicide is really hard. Sometimes it's impossible, like if I'm paralyzed or otherwise physically compromised. I could refuse food and water. No one can force me to eat, but this could be considered a mental health problem rather than the act of a rational person who's ready to die. And I could be forced to eat. And maybe it is. Who knows? Determining when suicide is rational is not something that anyone has really figured out yet. Legal euthanasia is, at its core, founded on the idea that it's rational for disabled people to kill themselves due to the nature of disability, and the idea that, in the case of disability, it's rational to value avoiding future pain more than the risk of eliminating future life experiences, which may include joy. If euthanasia is legal, then rather than treating a suicidal disabled person with financial support, therapy, and antidepressants, a doctor may choose to kill them instead, depriving them and their family of all potential future happiness because joy and the experience of being alive are not viewed as valuable compared to the fact that they will feel pain in the future. At least that's ostensibly the argument. This word pain is doing a lot of work obfuscating a lot more eugenics-y notions of value. So, is it worth it to endanger the lives of disabled people facing typical depression, who are possibly even just depressed due to their material conditions, so that a few rational suicides can be painless? Obviously, a painless lethal injection administered by a professional would be my preferred option of death. I understand that pain is bad, and I, too, want to avoid it. I'm not totally opposed to a fully consenting adult with a terminal diagnosis receiving a physician-assisted suicide. I also want people to have as much bodily autonomy as possible. This procedure would just have to take place in a different world in which there is no ableism and all people are given access to whatever conditions constitute a good life. I guess when it comes down to it, I value disabled people's lives more than abled people's comfort. Oh god, it's the masks argument all over again. We still have too many ridiculous notions of disability being life-ending rather than life-altering. We're still a little too empathetic when parents kill their disabled or neurodivergent children. Many disability advocates argue that a doctor's job ought to always be healing and comfort. Killing a person is obviously doing harm. Advocates fear that legalizing killing for doctors may lead to more stigma against living with chronic health conditions, less value placed upon life in general, and more pressure for us to be put down like sick dogs. Especially poor people. Just think about going to the vet. When my cat was diagnosed with cancer, the vet said it would be thousands of dollars for treatment, but only $40 to put her down. My parents could only afford the $40. To be fair, as I mentioned before, it currently seems that in places where euthanasia is legal, it's mostly been utilized by people in higher socioeconomic classes. In the article Disability Culture Meets Euthanasia Culture, Lessons from My Cat, by Linda Andre, she discusses how, after a routine physical, the vet told her that her seemingly healthy cat had lung cancer and that she ought to kill her as soon as possible. The cat lived entirely symptomless for 2 full months after the vet recommended immediate euthanasia. Then the breathing difficulty started, and every day for a month, Linda Andre expected her cat to die because she wasn't told anything about the disease progression. She was afraid to ask questions and just be told she was a bad person for allowing her cat to experience any amount of suffering. She says, "In euthanasia culture, vets don't need to know the first thing about dying or death, the kind that's not as simple as giving a vaccination. If they, or their clients, never see it, how do they learn?" This takes us back to how people in our culture are uncomfortable being around care facilities, because we hide those who need assistance, both in the media and through separate educational classes, separate homes, and even separate workplaces in many cases, but we'll get into sheltered workshops some other time. When disability is invisible, people don't know how to respond to it. How will we learn about caring for or respecting people who are disabled or nearing the end of life if our society separates us and encourages everyone to forget that we exist? How indeed if we begin killing disabled people for cheaper than we can care for them? I'm not saying that human medicine will necessarily follow the model of veterinary medicine if we legalize euthanasia. Obviously, pets occupy a different place in society than people. But I do already see people choosing death, whether it's regular suicide or physician-assisted, based more on a financial cost-benefits analysis than based on the suffering directly caused by their illnesses. Dr. Kevorkian famously put people out of their misery in America. So let's look at a couple of his cases, shall we? A 43-year-old woman who was diagnosed with a non-terminal but impairing condition who was subsequently abandoned by her husband, who also took her children. A disabled man who had been waiting for 9 months for his HMO to get him a wheelchair. And of course, a man whose greatest fear was being forced into a, quote, rat-infested nursing home. 66 of Kevorkian's 93 mercy killings did not fall within the category of terminally ill at all. And of course, we have to mention Hitler. This is the internet, we have to do it. Dishonorable mention to Hitler and the overwhelmingly supportive Nazi doctors who enthusiastically euthanized the disabled population en masse following the first mercy killing of a blind child. I mean, America had a head start in the eugenics race with our compulsory sterilization procedures starting in the 1920s, but Germany caught up. Sterilization began in 1933 and extermination soon followed. The first prototypes of gas chambers were built in hospitals. Remember that disabled people were the first to die in Nazi Germany. If you want to know more, read Marta Russell's essays, Dollars and Death, The Question of Physician-Assisted Suicide, and Eugenics and the Sole Possible Economic Order.
So, what about if you were in a permanent vegetative state, or otherwise couldn't ask to be taken off a machine?
I don't really see how this is different. I'd have to write an advance directive. I really do need to get around to that. Just take me off the machines and give me painkillers until I'm dead.
So what if there is no advance directive? Or, okay, imagine that you just spent 9 months carrying a wanted child, and then after you give birth, the doctor hands you your baby who can't seem to stop screaming, and says, I'm afraid he was born with a terrible condition. He will be in excruciating pain for his entire life. It's not, in itself, deadly, but the pain is constant, and he cannot adapt to it. He's certain to suffer every moment of every day. There will be no respite, and it is impossible to cure. She then offers to put the child out of his misery. Do you accept?
Ah, okay, you want to move on to filicide. Euthanasia without consent. Well, if I could know for certain that what the doctor said is absolutely true, then yeah, I'd have the baby euthanized. I'd obviously have to research the condition first, but if I had to suffer in horrible, horrible pain every second of my life with no respite, then I'd probably want to die too. Probably. But recognize that my assessment of this baby's quality of life and how much it may value its own life was based entirely on my own experience. I haven't known any people who live in excruciating, entirely unmanageable pain. Maybe if I met someone with the baby's unending, untreatable pain condition who said they're happy to be alive, then I'd reevaluate my biases. Remember that our judgments of quality of life have nothing to do with the value of life. The biggest problem with this hypothetical is that countless people with disabilities have been euthanized without their consent, that is, murdered by caregivers or the state, because people think we're all this hypothetical pain baby. News organizations and courts are often uncomfortably empathetic when parents are charged with murdering their disabled child. People justify putting others out of their misery for things as small as being nonverbal or needing help going to the bathroom. By claiming there is no quality of life for a person who must have carers, who can't work, or who may otherwise not be accepted by society, they also claim there is no value to their lives. However, if you talk to disabled and neurodivergent people, they don't seem to be of that opinion. Not one bit. A person with what is considered a low quality of life, for example, someone bedbound, may value their own life very highly, whereas someone with a high quality of life, say an able-bodied millionaire, may not value their life very highly at all. In fact, we see high-profile millionaires commit suicide fairly frequently. Depression can happen to anyone. Obviously, I'm not saying we should kill people who don't value their lives, or not treat depression. Simply that, whatever our societal notions of quality are, they have nothing to do with how much a person values their own life, or even how valuable their lives are to society. Some organizations, like Not Dead Yet, argue that the entire concept of euthanasia is ableist by definition.
What do you mean?
Well, why should we treat suicidal able-bodied people with depression meds and therapy, and suicidal disabled people with death? 1/3 of people who receive life-ending medication in Oregon, remember these are people with less than 6 months to live, decide not to take it at all. Anyone who has experienced suicidal ideation knows that these urges often pass, even without intervention.
So you're saying people should just get used to it if they have a painful disease that's killing them?
Look, I would love it if we could live in a society where people could choose to die painlessly and peacefully when they're ready. But we're not there yet. How would we distinguish a disabled person with high care needs who has temporary depression due to their material conditions from a disabled person with high care needs who feels genuinely ready to pass on? Do you honestly think the medical establishment, as it is now, would bother trying to make that distinction? Shouldn't the default be to care rather than to kill?
So, what? Where are we on euthanasia?
More like euthanasia. I vote nay. We're not there yet. I mean, passive euthanasia and suicide are both legal. A person can refuse medical care or kill themselves in whatever way they deem appropriate.
So people are supposed to just get used to suffering so that disabled people don't kill themselves? I don't know. I guess, if I had your life, yeah, I might kill myself. But you don't really seem to want that.
Many disabled people, including myself, have been told, if I had your life, I'd probably kill myself. You must be so strong. Indeed, on many occasions, particularly when I'm confronted by my inability to provide for myself financially, I felt like the reasonable thing to do would be for me to die. All I've ever wanted to be when I was growing up was a 3rd-grade teacher and mother of an adopted child. Now, those two dreams are impossible to achieve, at least in the way I imagined previously. I plan to be financially secure enough to not depend on a significant other or my family or anyone else. That dream, again, is maybe not impossible, but certainly much fucking harder now. But does this mean my life is without value? Does this mean I would be better off dead? It feels almost sacrilegious for me to even discuss the life I would have had without disability, because so much disability activism has to focus on proving our lives are valuable, which of fucking course they are, that we aren't given breathing room to say, yes, I've doubted it too. Maybe then we could progress discussions beyond empty platitudes like, you're succeeding in your own way, you've overcome so much, wow, you're so brave. I've had to mourn the loss of these dreams. I've had to mourn the loss of this person I thought I could be. It's as if someone really did die. Signing this disability paperwork is like signing my own death certificate. But I have to kill the old me in order to live happily now. In some ways, people are right when they say, I'd probably kill myself. Because the person you are before disability, the goals and dreams you think are incredibly important, have to die in order to be reborn into something new and equally valuable. In the times I've seriously considered suicide, it hasn't been to end my own suffering. It's only a passing thought when I'm actually in horrible pain, not a serious consideration. I know that pain passes. It'll abate with time and medication. No, I mean when I've seriously thought about it and planned it, it's been due to the feeling of being a burden, the feeling of social exclusion and isolation, the feeling that my happiness is not valuable. And I'm not alone. If I may jump back to babies, I think many parents, when they elect to abort disabled babies, do so because they had specific ableist ideas about who their child would be before it was ever born. They can't live with the perceived loss of these imaginary opportunities, especially if they have little to no experience with disability in their own lives. Remember my own reasons for euthanizing the hypothetical pain baby were based solely upon my own experiences with pain. Too many parents aren't ready to change their conception of what a life ought to be and have a restrictive notion of parenting which doesn't respect their child's autonomy. I'm sure everyone watching this has disappointed their parents in some way. Maybe you're a lawyer and they wanted you to be a doctor. Maybe you're gay and they expected you would be straight. Maybe you don't follow their religion. Those things don't make you lesser, just different. If a baby is born disabled, or LGBT, many parents think they must mourn the loss of a hypothetical perfect child, rather than accept their child for who they really are. You don't have to mourn. Your child is still here. Parental love shouldn't be conditional. Euthanasia is painted as a human rights issue, giving people the freedom to choose death. But freedom isn't giving people more tools to die. We already have those. Freedom is giving people the resources to live.